Listen to me, and I mean really listen, because I don't have much time and the air in this room already feels like it's thinning out. My name is Sarah Miller. I'm just a mother, a woman who tried to keep her head above water in a small, gray town outside of Dayton, Ohio. I worked the late shift at the packing plant, coming home with my back aching and my soul feeling like it had been rubbed raw by the world. I thought my biggest problems were the mortgage and the way my 3-year-old, Toby, wouldn't eat anything but crackers. I thought I knew what tired felt like. I thought I knew what scary was, maybe a dark alley or a bill I couldn't pay. But I didn't know anything. I was walking through my life like a person blindfolded in a minefield, completely unaware of the spiritual war raging just inches from my face. I'm talking to you right now because I saw something, no, I heard something, that I was never supposed to hear. It's changed the way I look at every shadow in the corner of my eye. It's changed the way I pray. And if you've got a second, if you've got any room left in your heart for a warning from a woman who's been to the edge of the pit and back, then stay with me. This isn't some campfire story. This is a confession. It started about 3 weeks ago. I'd bought this high-end baby monitor at a garage sale down in Kettering. It was one of those fancy ones with the night vision and the two-way audio, the kind I could never afford full price. I set it up in Toby's room because he'd started having night terrors, or so I thought. He'd wake up laughing, which is somehow worse than crying, and I'd find him sitting up in his crib, staring at the empty corner of the room. The first night I used it, I was sitting at my kitchen table, nursing a cold cup of coffee, trying to balance my checkbook. The monitor was sitting there on the wood, the little green light blinking like a heartbeat. The house was dead quiet. You know that kind of quiet that feels heavy? Like the walls are leaning in to listen to you breathe? That's what it felt like. Suddenly, the speaker crackled. It wasn't just static. It was the sound of a voice. A small, high-pitched voice. Toby was talking. "He's funny, Mr. Smiles," Toby said. I froze. The hair on my arms stood up. My son didn't know anyone named Mr. Smiles. We didn't have any neighbors with that name, and I sure as heck didn't let him watch anything on TV that would have a character like that. I leaned into the monitor, my heart starting to thump against my ribs. I heard a sound then, a low, wet clicking. It sounded like someone trying to whistle with a mouth full of pennies. "Mr. Smiles says you're going away, Mommy," Toby whispered into the darkness of his room. I felt a chill go down my spine that was so cold it felt like a needle. I got up, my chair screeching against the linoleum, and I ran up those stairs. I burst into his room, flicking on the light, expecting to find, I don't know, a prowler? A monster? But the room was empty. Toby was just sitting there, blinking at the light, his blue eyes wide and innocent. The corner he'd been looking at was bare. Just the peeling wallpaper and his toy chest. "Who are you talking to, baby?" I asked, my voice shaking. He just pointed to the corner and said, "Mr. Smiles. He has lots of teeth, Mommy. He says the party is starting soon." I didn't sleep that night. I sat on the floor of his room until the sun came up over the rusted roofs of the neighborhood. I told myself it was just a toddler's imagination. We do that, don't we? We explain away the supernatural because the truth is too much for us to handle. We call it coincidence or psychology because we're terrified to admit that there are things in this world, and things from the next, that don't care about our logic. Before I go any further, I need to know who I'm talking to. I'm sitting here in the dark, and I need to feel like I'm not alone with this. Where are you listening from right now? Are you in your car? Are you sitting in your living room in Texas, or maybe a quiet apartment in New York? Please, write your city or state in the comments. I need to see the names of places where there's still light. I need to know that this warning is spreading, because what Mr. Smiles showed me, it's coming from more than just me. It's a darkness that's hungry, and it starts with the things we think are safe. The next few days, the atmosphere in the house shifted. You know how it feels when a storm is coming? That static electricity in the air that makes your skin itch? It was like that, but permanent. The air felt thick, like I was walking through invisible cobwebs. And Toby, he stopped playing with his trucks. He'd just sit by the baby monitor and whisper. I tried to turn the monitor off, but it wouldn't stay off. I'd press the button, the light would die, and 5 minutes later, I'd hear that click-a-sh-ch of the speaker activating. I even unplugged it once, and I swear on my mother's grave, the thing kept chirping. That's when I knew this wasn't an electronic glitch. This was something spiritual. This was an invitation into a nightmare I wasn't prepared for. I remember it was a Tuesday. I had just gotten home from a double shift. I was bone tired, the kind of tired that makes your vision blur. I slumped into my recliner, the house pitch black except for that tiny green eye of the monitor on the side table. Toby was supposedly asleep. But then, the static started. It wasn't the clicking this time. It was the sound of wind. A howling, mournful wind that sounded like it was blowing through a graveyard. And then, I heard a voice. But it wasn't Toby's. And it wasn't the clicking of Mr. Smiles. It was a recording. The quality was grainy, like an old tape, but the sounds were unmistakable. I heard the shuffling of feet on carpet. I heard the muffled sobs of a woman. It sounded like my sister, Elena. Then, I heard a man's voice, deep and somber. We are gathered here today, the voice said, echoing through the tiny plastic speaker, to say our final goodbyes to Sarah Jane Miller. My breath hitched in my throat. I couldn't move. My hands were locked onto the arms of the chair. That was my name. That was my name. She was taken from us so suddenly, the voice continued. I recognized the man now. It was Pastor Greg from the little Baptist church I hadn't stepped foot in for 15 years. But as we look upon this casket, we have to ask the question she never asked herself, where is her soul tonight? I felt a physical weight press down on my chest, like an invisible hand was pinning me to the chair. The monitor started playing music, that slow, agonizing organ music you only hear at funerals. I could hear the sound of dirt hitting wood. Thump. 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 Each sound felt like a hammer hitting my heart. Mommy? Toby's voice came through the monitor, cutting through the funeral service. Mr. Smiles says they're digging the hole deeper. He says the fire is waiting for the one who forgot to look up. I screamed. I finally found my voice and I screamed, grabbing the monitor and throwing it against the wall. It hit the drywall and shattered into a dozen pieces. But the sound didn't stop. The pieces on the floor kept playing the eulogy. The speaker, cracked and hanging by a wire, let out a sound that I can only describe as a demonic laugh, a sound that was both a shriek and a chuckle, vibrating the very floorboards beneath my feet. I ran to Toby's room, my heart hammering so hard I thought it would burst out of my chest. I burst through the door, expecting to see that Mr. Smiles entity, expecting to see a demon standing over my son's crib. But Toby wasn't in his crib. The window was open. The cold Ohio wind was whipping the curtains around like ghostly limbs. And there, standing by the window, was my son. He wasn't looking at me. He was looking out into the dark, into the woods behind our house. He's waiting, Mommy, Toby said, his voice flat and devoid of any emotion. He says your time is almost up. He says the recording is the only truth you have left. I grabbed him, pulling him away from the window, locking it and pulling the shades. I held him so tight he started to cry, but I didn't care. I was terrified. I looked down at the floorboards and I saw it, a footprint. But it wasn't a human footprint. It was long, charred, like something had stepped there with a foot made of hot coal. It was still smoking. The smell of sulfur and rot filled the room, a smell that reminded me of things dying in the summer heat. I realized then that I wasn't just dealing with a haunting. I was being hunted. My soul was being hunted. I had spent years ignoring God, years thinking I could do it all on my own, and now the enemy was at the door, showing me my own end. He was showing me that my tomorrow wasn't guaranteed. Listen, I'm telling you this because I thought I had time. I thought I could worry about God when I was old, when I was gray, when I had lived my life. But that monitor, it was playing a recording of a future that was closer than I ever imagined. I stood there in that nursery, clutching Toby so hard I could feel his little heart hammering against my chest like a trapped bird. The smell, that sulfur and rot, it wasn't just in the room, it felt like it was inside my nose, inside my throat, coating my lungs. I looked at that charred footprint on the hardwood floor, and I felt a coldness settle into my bones that no heater in the world could touch. It was the kind of cold that comes from the grave. It was the realization that something had been in here with my son, something that didn't have a face, something that called itself Mr. Smiles, while it planned my transition into the dirt. I'm talking to you right now because you might think your house is a fortress. You might think those deadbolts and that security system keep you safe. But I'm telling you, there are things that don't need a key. There are things that walk through your front door because you left a spiritual window open years ago and forgot to close it. You need to hear this. You need to stay with me until the very end of this, because what I discovered in the next hour, it's the difference between life and a darkness so deep you can't even scream in it. And if this story, this warning, is reaching you, don't just let it pass by. Subscribe to this, make sure you're tuned in, because I'm not doing this for likes or views. I'm doing this because I'm haunted by the fact that so many of you are walking toward the same cliff I was, laughing all the way. Stay with me, folks. Don't turn away. Your soul might just depend on it. I carried Toby downstairs, my legs feeling like they were made of lead. Every shadow on the staircase seemed to reach out for my ankles. I could still hear it, that broken monitor in the kitchen. I'd smashed it, I'd thrown it against the wall, but the sound was still coming through the shards. It was louder now. The funeral service was continuing. Sarah Miller was a good woman, the pastor's voice said, but it sounded distorted now, like it was being played through a throat full of gravel. She worked hard. She paid her taxes. But she lived as if the Creator didn't exist. She built a house on sand, and tonight, the tide has come in. I walked into the kitchen, my eyes fixed on the pieces of plastic scattered across the floor. They were glowing. Not a bright, clean light, but a sickly, pulsating purple-gray, like a bruise. And there, standing in the middle of the kitchen, was something I can't explain away with logic. It wasn't a man. It was a tall, spindly shape that looked like it was made of smoke and old, dried leather. It didn't have eyes, just two hollow pits that seemed to suck the light out of the room. And it was smiling. It had too many teeth, rows and rows of thin, needle-like teeth that didn't fit in its mouth. "Mr. Smiles," Toby whispered from my arms. He wasn't scared anymore. That was the most terrifying part. He looked at that thing like it was an old friend. The entity didn't move. It just stood there, and the air around it began to vibrate with that clicking sound I'd heard over the monitor. Click. 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 And then, the voice from the broken monitor changed. It wasn't the pastor anymore. It was my voice. "I have so much time," the recording of me said. It was a recording of a prayer I'd never finished, a thought I'd had 1,000 times. "I'll get right with God tomorrow. I'll start going back to church when things settle down. I just need to get this promotion. I just need to get the bills paid. God understands. He knows I'm busy." The tall thing in the kitchen tilted its head. The funeral sound in the background grew into a roar of fire. I could hear the crackling of flames, and beneath that, the sound of thousands of voices wailing, not in sadness, but in absolute, localized agony. It was the sound of a place where hope had been surgically removed. "You're not supposed to be here," I choked out, pulling Toby's face into my shoulder so he wouldn't see. "This is my house. In the name of. I couldn't say it. I tried to say the name of Jesus, but the word stuck in my throat like a dry bone. I realized, with a horror that eclipsed the monster in front of me, that I hadn't used that name in years. Not for real. I'd used it as a swear word. I'd used it as a filler. But I hadn't called on him as Lord since I was a teenager. I had no authority. I was standing in a lion's den with nothing but my own pride to protect me, and the lion was hungry. Mr. Smiles moved then. He didn't walk, he just sort of shifted closer. The temperature in the kitchen dropped so low I could see my breath in the dim light of the oven clock. "The recording isn't a mistake, Sarah," a voice hissed. It didn't come from the monitor. It came from everywhere. It came from the walls, from the floor, from the very air I was breathing. "It's a preview. We've already built the room for you. It's small. It's dark. And you'll be there forever, replaying every moment you chose yourself over him." I felt a wave of such intense regret that I fell to my knees. It wasn't just fear of the monster. It was the crushing weight of my own sin. I saw my life played out in front of me, not the big crimes. I wasn't a murderer or a thief, but the apathetic, cold-hearted way I'd ignored the one who gave me breath. I'd treated the king of the universe like a nuisance I'd eventually get around to talking to. And now, the tomorrow I'd promised him was being taken away. The funeral recording started to play, the sound of the lid closing. Creak. Slam. The finality of that sound broke something inside me. I realized that the woman being buried in that recording wasn't just a version of me, it was the soul I had neglected until it had withered away. "Please," I sobbed, the tears hot against my frozen cheeks. "Please, not Toby. Take me, but let him go." The entity let out a sound like tearing silk. It reached out a long, shadow-thin finger toward my son. "He sees us now," it whispered. "Once they see us, they belong to the one who showed them. You let me in, Sarah. Every time you turned your back on the light, you opened the door a little wider for me to slide through the cracks." I looked around my kitchen, my normal, suburban kitchen with the magnets on the fridge and the dirty dishes in the sink, and it looked like a tomb. I realized that my whole life had been a funeral procession, and I was the one carrying the casket. I had been dead while I was living. Suddenly, the shattered pieces of the monitor on the floor didn't just play audio. A light, blindingly white and pure, began to bleed out from underneath the kitchen cabinets. It wasn't like a flashlight, it was heavy, like a liquid. It poured across the floor, and where it touched the purple-gray glow of the demon, the darkness vanished with a hiss like water on a hot griddle. Mr. Smiles recoiled. His long, spindly limbs twitched and he backed into the shadows of the pantry. The clicking sound turned into a frantic screech. A voice, calm and vibrating with a power that made the house tremble, spoke. It didn't come from a speaker. It came from the very foundations of the earth. "Not this night," the voice said. I felt a hand on my shoulder. Not the cold, dead hand of the thing in the pantry, but a hand that felt like it was made of sun and iron. I looked up, and for a split second, the kitchen was gone. I was standing in a place of infinite gold, and a figure stood there, towering, magnificent, with eyes like flaming torches and a sword that looked like it was forged from stars. It wasn't a pretty angel like you see on Christmas cards. This was a warrior. This was a messenger of the Most High, and the sheer holiness of him made me want to crawl into the dirt. "Sarah Miller," the angel said, and his voice was both a judgment and a mercy. "You have been shown the end of the broad road. You have heard the music of your own destruction. Will you continue to walk toward the fire, or will you turn?" I couldn't speak. I could only weep. The weight of my choices was a mountain on my back. I saw the cross then, not a piece of jewelry, but a rugged, bloody, terrifying reality. I saw that every time I'd said, tomorrow, I was spitting on the sacrifice that had been made to keep me out of that recording. The vision snapped back to my kitchen. The angel was gone, but the white light remained, hovering like a barrier between me and the pantry where Mr. Smiles was cowering. The funeral recording had stopped. In its place, there was a profound, ringing silence. Listen up, I whispered to myself, the words catching in my throat. I looked at Toby, who was blinking, his eyes finally clearing of that strange, vacant stare. I'm talking to you right now, Sarah. This is it. There are no more tomorrows. But the darkness wasn't gone. It was just waiting. I could feel Mr. Smiles in the pantry, his many teeth chattering in the dark, waiting for the light to fade. He knew my heart was still divided. He knew I was scared, but he also knew I hadn't fully surrendered. I stood up, holding Toby, and I knew I had to get out of that house. But as I turned toward the front door, the baby monitor shards on the floor began to vibrate again. The voice that came out this time wasn't the pastor, and it wasn't me. It was a voice I recognized from my childhood, my grandmother, who had died praying for me. Sarah, her voice crackled through the plastic. The door is closing, honey. The master of the house is getting up to lock the gate. If you don't run now, you'll be on the outside forever. I ran. I didn't grab my purse, I didn't grab my shoes. I ran out into the cold Ohio night, my bare feet hitting the gravel of the driveway. I got into my car and slammed the doors, locking them as if a piece of glass could stop a demon. I looked back at the house, and in the upstairs window, Toby's window, I saw a face. It wasn't Mr. Smiles. It was me. A version of me that looked gray, bloated, and hopeless, staring out from the glass with eyes that had already seen the inside of the pit. She pressed a hand against the pane, and her lips moved. Too late, she seemed to say. It's already too late. I put the car in reverse and floored it, the tires screaming. I didn't know where I was going, I just knew I had to find a place where the darkness couldn't follow. But as I drove, the car radio flickered to life. It didn't play music. It played the sound of a shovel hitting the earth. Thump. 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 Buddy, if you think you're safe because you're a good person, you need to listen to the rest of this. Because what happened at that 24-hour diner down the road, that's when I realized that the funeral wasn't just a warning. It was a countdown. And the clock was ticking faster than I could run. I didn't stop driving until the gas light on the dashboard started glowing like a mocking orange eye. My hands were cramped so tight around the steering wheel that I could feel the pulse in my fingertips, thrumming in time with that rhythmic, soul-crushing sound coming from the radio. Thump. 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 The sound of dirt hitting a casket. It didn't matter that I'd turned the volume knob all the way to the left. It didn't matter that I'd eventually punched the screen until the glass cracked. The sound wasn't coming from the electronics anymore, it was coming from the air itself. It was coming from the vents. It was coming from the floorboards. I was driving a hearse, and I was the only one who knew it. I pulled into a 24-hour diner off Route 35, a place called the Rusty Anchor. It was one of those old-school joints with the corrugated metal siding and a neon sign that hummed loud enough to give you a headache. I needed light. I needed people. I needed to see someone flipping a burger or pouring a cup of coffee, something, anything, to remind me that the world was still normal, that I wasn't already sliding into the grave that Monitor had promised me. I unbuckled Toby, who had fallen into a deep, unnerving sleep. He didn't even stir when I lifted him out. He felt heavy, like lead, and his skin was cold. I tucked him against my chest, his small head resting on my shoulder, and I walked toward the diner. The wind was whipping through the trees behind the parking lot, making the branches moan like a choir of the damned. I didn't look back. I knew if I looked back, I'd see that spindly, shadow-thin figure with the needle teeth standing by my rear bumper. When I pushed open the heavy glass door, the bell jingled. It should have been a welcoming sound, but in that moment, it sounded like a tolling bell for a funeral. The diner was nearly empty. There was a waitress behind the counter, an older woman with hair the color of wood ash and eyes that looked like they'd seen every sin committed in the state of Ohio. And in a booth in the far corner, there was a man. He was wearing a worn-out denim jacket and a bald cap pulled low over his eyes. He had a cup of coffee in front of him, the steam rising in a straight, unwavering line. He didn't look up when I walked in, but I felt a jolt of electricity go through me when I passed his booth. It wasn't a scary feeling, not like the cold rot of Mr. Smiles. This was different. This was like the feeling you get right before a lightning strike, when the very air feels heavy with purpose. I sat down in a booth as far from the windows as I could get. I laid Toby down on the vinyl seat next to me, covering him with my jacket. My heart was still racing, a frantic, uneven beat that felt like it was trying to escape my ribs. The waitress walked over, a damp rag in her hand. Her name tag said, Mabel. "You look like you've seen a ghost, honey," Mabel said, her voice like sandpaper. She didn't mean it as a joke. She looked at me with a pity that made my throat tighten. I just need some coffee," I managed to say. "And maybe a bowl of soup for the boy when he wakes up." Mabel nodded, but she didn't move. She leaned over the table, her voice dropping to a whisper. "You can't outrun it, you know. Whatever is following you. It's got your scent. It's been waiting a long time for you to finally notice it." I stared at her, my mouth falling open. "What are you talking about?" "The monitor," she said. My blood turned to ice. "How do you know about the monitor?" Mabel just sighed and started wiping the table. "We all have monitors, Sarah. Some of us hear them in the bottle. Some hear them in the pills. Some hear them in the quiet moments at night when the TV is off and we have to face the fact that we're empty. You just happen to get the one that plays the truth out loud. You're hearing your funeral because you've been dead for years. You just haven't stopped breathing yet." She walked away before I could respond, leaving me shivering in the heat of the diner. I looked down at the table, and that's when I heard it. The jukebox in the corner, which hadn't been playing anything, suddenly hummed to life. But it didn't play a country song. It didn't play a rock ballad. It played the sound of a woman crying. It was my sister's voice again. She never listened. Elena's voice sobbed through the diner's speakers. I tried to tell her about the Lord. I tried to tell her that life is a vapor. But she always had an excuse. She always thought there was more time. And now look at her. Look at what's left. I put my hands over my ears, but the sound was inside my head. I looked around the diner, desperate for someone to stop it, but the other patrons, a truck driver at the counter, a young couple in the back, didn't seem to hear a thing. They were just eating, staring at their phones, oblivious to the spiritual carnage happening 5 feet away from them. That's when the man in the denim jacket stood up. He walked over to my table with a slow, deliberate gait. He didn't look like an angel, not like the one I'd seen in my kitchen. He looked like a man who had worked in a coal mine for 40 years. His face was etched with deep lines, and his hands were calloused and scarred. But when he looked at me, his eyes were like blue fire. They weren't looking at my face, they were looking at my soul. "Sarah Miller," he said. His voice didn't rattle the windows, but it carried a weight that made it impossible to ignore. "Why are you still running?" "I'm trying to save my son," I whispered, my voice breaking. "That thing. Mr. Smiles, he's after Toby." The man shook his head. "The enemy isn't after your son, Sarah. He's using your son to get to you. He knows that a mother will endure anything for her child, including a slow walk into the gates of hell if she thinks it'll keep her baby safe. But you can't save that boy. Not when your own lamp is empty. He sat down in the booth across from me. He didn't ask permission. He just sat. I'm talking to you right now, Sarah, because the Father has heard the prayers of your grandmother. The ones she prayed 30 years ago are still hanging in the air like incense. They're the only reason that thing hasn't dragged you into the woods already. Who are you? I asked, trembling. A brother who was pulled from the same fire you're standing in, he said. Listen up. You think that recording is a curse? It's a mercy. Most people go to their graves never hearing the sound of the shovel. They go in thinking they've got 80 years, and they wake up in a place where the clock never moves. You've been given the rare privilege of hearing the end before you reach it. But the window is closing. You saw yourself in that glass back at the house, didn't you? I nodded, the memory of that gray, bloated version of myself making me want to vomit. That's the soul that hasn't been washed, the man said. That's the Sarah Miller who died without the blood. And buddy, you need to hear this, that version of you is already standing at the great white throne. The only reason she hasn't heard the final sentence is because the king is still holding the pen. But he's about to set it down. I looked at Toby. He was still asleep, but his little brow was furrowed as if he were having a nightmare. I realized then that my sin wasn't just about me. My apathy, my tomorrow attitude, my pride, it was creating a vacuum that the darkness was more than happy to fill. By refusing to lead my son to the light, I had practically handed him the hand of the monster. I was his protector, and I was failing him in the only way that actually mattered. What do I do? I asked, the words feeling like shards of glass in my throat. How do I stop the recording? The man leaned in close. I could smell the scent of cedar and rain on him. You don't stop the recording by running. You stop it by dying. Not the death of the body, the death of the self. You have to stop trying to be the god of your own life, Sarah. You've done a real poor job of it so far, haven't you? I looked at my hands. They were dirty, scratched from the shattered monitor, and shaking. He was right. I had tried to build a life on my own terms, and I had ended up in a midnight diner with a demon in my rearview mirror and a funeral service playing on the jukebox. I'm scared, I said. You should be, he replied. Fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. But the enemy wants you to have the wrong kind of fear. He wants you to have the fear that paralyzes. God wants you to have the fear that drives you to your knees. Because the only place the monster can't reach you is at the foot of the cross. Suddenly, the lights in the diner flickered. The hum of the neon sign grew into a scream. The waitress, Mabel, stopped wiping the counter and looked toward the door. Her face went pale, actually, it went translucent. I turned my head. Outside, the parking lot was filling with fog. It wasn't normal fog. It was thick, oily, and it moved with a purpose. And standing in the middle of it, illuminated by the flickering, rusty anchor sign, was Mr. Smiles. He was taller now. His spindly limbs seemed to stretch up toward the power lines. He was holding something in his hand. It was the baby monitor. The plastic was fused to his skin, and the speaker was embedded in his chest. The service is starting, Sarah, the demon's voice echoed, distorted and wet. The guests are arriving. They're all waiting to see what's inside the box. Don't keep them waiting. The man in the denim jacket stood up. He didn't look afraid. He looked ready. He placed a hand on the table, and for a second, I saw a scar in the center of his palm, not a work scar, but a hole, as if a large nail had been driven through it. My heart stopped. I looked up at his face, but he was already moving toward the door. Stay here, he said. Don't look away from the boy. And Sarah, start talking to the one you've been ignoring. He's the only one who can pay the bill you've run up. He walked out into the fog. I watched through the window as the darkness swallowed him whole. I heard a sound like a thunderclap, and then a screech of agony that made the plates on the counter rattle. The fog began to swirl violently, and for a moment, I saw flashes of brilliant, blinding light, swords of gold cutting through the oily blackness. But then, the recording started again. It wasn't coming from the jukebox anymore. It was coming from the booth next to me. I looked over, and the booth was no longer empty. Sitting there, dressed in a black funeral dress, was me. She looked at me with those dead, gray eyes. She held out a hand, and in her palm was a handful of graveyard dirt. "It's a beautiful service, isn't it?" the dead Sarah whispered. "Everyone said such nice things. But they don't know where we are, Sarah. They don't know how loud the worms are." I backed away, clutching Toby, but the walls of the diner were starting to melt. The chrome was turning into rusted iron. The floor was turning into soft, damp earth. I realized with a jolt of pure, unadulterated terror that the diner wasn't a refuge. It was part of the vision. The recording was accelerating. "Jesus!" I finally screamed. It wasn't a prayer. It was a cry for help from a drowning woman. "Jesus, help me. Please." The dead version of me laughed, a sound like dry leaves. "You waited too long, Sarah. The ink is dry. The hole is dug. The monitor is just playing back what's already happened." But as she spoke, the man in the denim jacket reappeared in the doorway. He was glowing now, not like a light bulb, but like a furnace. He reached out and grabbed the dead version of me by the throat. She didn't scream, she just dissolved into a cloud of black flies that buzzed frantically before vanishing into the vents. The man turned to me. He looked exhausted, but his eyes were still fire. "The blood covers the debt," he panted, "but you have to sign the papers, Sarah. You have to choose. He won't drag you into heaven against your will, even if the alternative is this." He pointed toward the kitchen. The swinging doors pushed open, and instead of a chef, I saw a staircase. It didn't go up. It went down. And from the bottom of those stairs, I could see the glow of something that wasn't light. It was a dull, pulsing red, the color of a dying ember, and the heat coming from it was so intense it singed my eyebrows. "That's the basement of your life," the man said. "That's where all the tomorrows went to rot. Do you want to see what's at the bottom, or are you ready to leave this house?" I looked at the stairs, and I heard the sound of my own voice from the recording, screaming, not in life, but in the realization of what she had lost. It was a sound of such absolute regret that I felt my soul shrivel. "I'm ready," I sobbed. "I'm ready to leave. Please, just tell me how to leave." "The exit isn't a door," the man said, his voice fading as the diner began to crumble into dust around us. "The exit is a cross. And you're going to have to carry yours through the woods before the sun comes up." The lights went out. The diner vanished. And suddenly, I was standing in the middle of the woods behind my house, the cold wind biting into my skin, with Toby crying in my arms and the sound of a shovel hitting the dirt right behind my left ear. I'm standing there, folks, right in the middle of those woods behind my house, and the world feels like it's made of wet ash and jagged glass. I can't even tell you how I got there. One second I was in that diner, smelling cedar and grease, and the next, the ground is cold beneath my bare feet and the Ohio wind is screaming through the oak trees like a choir of the damned. I'm clutching Toby so tight I'm afraid I'm going to bruise him, but he's still dead weight in my arms, his little chest rising and falling in that heavy, unnatural sleep. And that sound. God help me, that sound. Thump. 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 It isn't coming from a radio anymore. It's coming from just past the line of brush, maybe 20 yards away. The sound of a metal shovel biting into the hard, frozen earth. Listen to me, because I'm talking to you right now from a place of total, gut-wrenching clarity. You think you have control over your life? You think you're the captain of your own ship? You're not. You're a passenger on a vessel that's already taking on water, and the only reason you haven't drowned yet is because the mercy of the Father is still holding back the tide. I learned that in the dark of those woods. I learned that every minute I spent living for myself was another shovelful of dirt being tossed out of the hole they were digging for me. I started walking toward the sound. I don't know why. Maybe it was that fight or flight response, but my legs were moving on their own, guided by a dread that felt like a hook in my navel. I pushed through a thicket of thorns that tore at my shins, but I didn't feel the pain. All I could see was the flickering light up ahead. It wasn't the warm light of a campfire. It was that same sickly, pulsating purple-gray glow from the broken monitor. I stepped out into a small clearing, and I stopped. The air there was hot, not a pleasant heat, but the kind of dry, suffocating heat you feel when you open the door to an industrial furnace. And there, in the center of the clearing, was a hole. A rectangular, jagged mouth in the earth. The dirt piled up around it was black and smoking, and the shovel was moving all by itself. It was rising into the air, driving deep into the ground, and tossing dirt into a pile, over and over, with a rhythmic, mechanical precision. But it wasn't the shovel that made me drop to my knees. It was what was sitting on the pile of dirt. It was the baby monitor. The one I'd smashed. It was sitting there, perfectly intact, and the screen was active. I could see myself on that screen. Not the me standing in the woods, but the me from 30 minutes ago, sitting in that diner. I watched myself on the screen as I cried and pleaded. And then, the image shifted. I saw a hospital room. I saw the machines flatlining. I saw the doctor, a man with tired eyes, pulling a white sheet over a face I knew all too well. It was my face. I was watching the moment of my own death, and it felt like a cold hand was reaching into my chest and squeezing my heart into a lump of ice. The recording is almost finished, Sarah, a voice hissed. I looked up. Mr. Smiles was standing on the other side of the grave. He looked different now. He was taller, thinner, his limbs like charred branches that had been twisted by a hurricane. He wasn't wearing a face anymore, he was just a mass of shifting shadows and those rows of needle teeth. And in his hand, he held a ledger. A thick, heavy book bound in what looked like old, stained bandages. "You're a good woman, aren't you?" the demon mocked, his voice sounding like 1,000 dead leaves skittering across a sidewalk. "You didn't kill anyone. You didn't steal. You just forgot. You forgot who gave you the breath in your lungs. You forgot the one who knit that boy in your arms together. You lived like a god, Sarah. And gods don't need a savior. That's why you're here. Because there's no room in the kingdom for people who are their own kings." He opened the ledger, and he began to read. He didn't read out sins like I expected. He didn't talk about the time I lied to my boss or the time I cheated on my taxes. No, he read out the silences. He read out every time I'd felt a nudge in my heart to pray and I'd turned on the TV instead. He read out every time I'd passed a person in need and looked at my watch. He read out every Sunday morning I'd spent sleeping in because I was too tired for the one who died to give me rest. 27 years of silence, Mr. Smiles whispered, and he smiled, a wide, horrific tear in the darkness. A lifetime of not right now. A legacy of maybe tomorrow. Buddy, you need to hear this, because he was talking to me but he's talking to you too. The enemy doesn't need you to be a monster. He just needs you to be busy. He just needs you to be distracted. He just needs you to think you've got plenty of time. I looked down at Toby, and my heart shattered. What about him? I sobbed. Why are you doing this to him? Because he's the price, the demon said. Sin isn't a private matter, Sarah. It's a plague. When you walk away from the light, you lead everyone behind you into the dark. You didn't teach him to pray. You didn't teach him the name that makes us tremble. You left him unguarded. You left the door wide open, and I just walked in. The shovel hit the ground one last time. Clang. It was done. The hole was deep enough. The service is about to begin, Mr. Smiles said, and he stepped toward me. The ground beneath my feet began to crumble. I felt the earth sliding, pulling me toward that jagged mouth in the dirt. I tried to scream, but the air was gone. The sulfur was so thick I was choking on it. Jesus! I tried to yell, but it came out as a pathetic wheeze. I realized then that I had no right to that name. I had spent my life ignoring him, and now, at the end, I was trying to use him like a celestial 911 operator. The shame of it was worse than the fear. I saw myself clearly for the first time, not as a victim, but as a rebel. I had been at war with the creator of the universe, and I was losing. Suddenly, the woods were flooded with a sound that I can only describe as a roar of 1,000 lions. It wasn't a scary sound, not to me. It was the sound of a rescue. The man in the denim jacket appeared again, but he wasn't a man anymore. He was a pillar of white-hot fire, standing right on the edge of the grave. He didn't have a shovel. He had a sword, and it was dripping with a light so bright it made the demon shriek and cover his hollow eyes. The debt is not yours to collect, accuser, the man, the angel, said. His voice was like thunder and honey, vibrating through my very teeth. The blood has been cried out for. The intercession of the faithful has reached the throne. She is mine. Mr. Smiles screamed, his shadow body thrashing in the light. She chose the road. She signed the contract with her own apathy. Look at the ledger. Look at the silence. The angel didn't look at the ledger. He looked at me. And in his eyes, I didn't see the judgment I deserved. I saw a grief that was deeper than the ocean. I saw the heart of a father who had been waiting for his daughter to come home, only to watch her play on the edge of a cliff for 30 years. Sarah, the angel said, and his voice softened. The recording can be erased. The funeral can be cancelled. But you have to pick up the cross. You have to walk through the fire and leave the you that you love so much behind. Are you ready to die so that you can finally live? I looked at the grave, and then I looked at the angel. I looked at Toby, who was finally starting to stir, his small hands reaching for my neck. I realized that if I didn't choose now, there would be no more choices. The monitor would play the end of the recording, the lid would close, and the silence would become eternal. I'm ready, I whispered. I don't want to be Sarah Miller anymore. I want to be his. Whatever it takes. Whatever the cost. Just save my son. Just save me from myself. The angel stepped into the grave. He didn't climb down, he stepped into it as if he were walking on air. He reached out and touched the bottom of the hole, and a light erupted from the earth that was so intense I had to shut my eyes. I felt a shockwave of power hit me, knocking me backward. When I opened my eyes, the grave was gone. The clearing was gone. The heat and the sulfur were gone. I was standing in my own backyard. The sun was just beginning to peek over the horizon, painting the Ohio sky in streaks of pink and gold. The dew was cold on my feet, and the birds were starting to sing. Toby was awake in my arms, looking around with bright, clear eyes. "Mommy?" he asked, his voice small and sweet. "Where's Mr. Smiles?" "He's gone, baby," I said, the tears flowing freely now. "He's never coming back. We're going to talk to someone else now. Someone much, much better." I walked toward my back door, my legs shaking, but for the first time in my life, I felt light. I felt like the weight of the world had been lifted off my shoulders. I stepped into my kitchen, and there, on the floor, were the shattered pieces of the baby monitor. They were just plastic now. No glow. No sound. Just junk. But as I reached for the phone to call my sister, the sister I hadn't spoken to about God in a decade, I heard a sound. It was a faint, distant static. It wasn't coming from the floor. It was coming from my own chest. I looked down at my reflection in the darkened window of the oven. I looked like myself again. No gray skin. No dead eyes. But then, the reflection changed for just a split second. I saw myself standing in a vast, white hall. And there was a line of people, thousands of them, stretching back as far as the eye could see. And at the front of that line was a great white throne. "Listen up," a voice whispered in my ear, the voice of the man in the denim jacket. "The warning was a gift, Sarah. But the walk has just begun. Don't think for a second that the war is over just because the sun came up. The enemy is still digging. He's just digging for someone else now." I realized then that this story wasn't just about me. It was a message I had to carry. I had been pulled out of the grave, but the woods were still full of people who were hearing their own funerals and thinking it was just a glitch in the system. Folks, I'm talking to you right now, and I'm telling you, the recording is playing for you too. Can you hear it? Can you hear the sound of the shovel? If you're sitting there thinking you've got time, you're listening to the father of lies. I sat down at my kitchen table, and I started to write. I started to record. I had to tell you what happened next, because the most terrifying part of this whole ordeal wasn't the demon or the grave. It was what the angel told me right before he vanished, the secret about why Mr. Smiles was so interested in my family in the first place. Buddy, you need to hear this. Because what I'm about to tell you in the final part of this confession, it's going to change the way you look at your children, your house, and your very soul. I'm sitting here in my kitchen, the morning sun finally starting to burn through that low Ohio fog, and my hands are still shaking so bad I can barely hold this pen. I'm looking at the shattered remains of that baby monitor on my linoleum floor, and I realized something that almost made me drop to my knees all over again. The pieces, they aren't just plastic and wire anymore. They look like old, weathered bone. Listen to me. I'm talking to you right now, and if you've stayed with me this far, it's because the Holy Spirit is tugging on your sleeve. It's because you know, deep down in that place you don't like to visit at 3 in the morning, that your house isn't as quiet as you think it is. You've heard the static. You felt that cold draft in a room with no windows. You've looked at your children and felt a sudden, sharp pang of fear that you aren't enough to protect them from what's coming for this world. Before the angel vanished in that backyard, before the light faded and left me standing in the dew with Toby, he told me the secret. He told me why Mr. Smiles had picked my house. He told me why that demon was so comfortable in my nursery, whispering to my son and playing recordings of my death. And folks, you need to hear this, because this is the part that's going to make you want to check every corner of your life. The angel looked at me, and his eyes weren't just fire, they were mirrors. I saw my whole family tree in them. I saw my father, a good man, who never darkened the door of a church. I saw my grandfather, who worked 40 years in the steel mills and died with a curse on his lips for a God he said he didn't believe in. And I saw myself, the culmination of 3 generations of good people who simply didn't care. Mr. Smiles is the demon of the middle ground, the angel said. His voice was a heavy weight on my soul. He doesn't haunt the murderers or the thieves. They already belong to his master. He haunts the good homes. He haunts the houses where the Bible is a coaster for a coffee mug. He haunts the families where Jesus is just a word used when you stub your toe. He is the spirit of apathy, Sarah. And apathy is the widest gate to hell. I realized then that my decency was the invitation. My niceness was the welcome mat. By refusing to choose a side, I had chosen the side of the shadow by default. You see, there is no neutral territory in the spirit world. You are either covered by the blood of the Lamb, or you are an open target. And I had left my son, my precious Toby, standing right in the crosshairs because I was too busy to pray. I was too modern to believe in a devil. I was too tired to seek the Lord. Folks, don't ignore this. I'm talking to you right now. You think you're safe because you're not a sinner in the way the world defines it. You think because you pay your bills and you're kind to your neighbors, the recording of your funeral will be a celebration of a life well lived. But I heard the recording. I heard what the demons hear. They don't care about your good life. They care about the fact that your soul is unclaimed. To them, you're just a fruit that's been left on the vine to rot. You're easy prey. I looked at those shards on the floor, and I finally understood the terrifying truth. Mr. Smiles wasn't just waiting for me to die. He was waiting for me to stay the same. He was waiting for me to continue being fine. Because if I stayed fine, I would lead Toby into the same gray, lukewarm lifestyle, and we would both end up in that hole he was digging in the woods. I fell on my face right there in the kitchen. I didn't care about the crumbs on the floor or the way my knees hit the hard ground. I cried out. I didn't just say, "Help me." I said, "Lord, I am a rebel. I have ignored you. I have treated your sacrifice like a cheap trinket. I have lived for myself while you bled for me. I am the reason that funeral recording exists. I am the one who dug the hole." And let me tell you, when I said that, when I stopped making excuses and finally looked at the cross for what it was, the atmosphere in the house changed. The static in the air didn't just stop, it snapped. It felt like a vacuum being filled with pure, pressurized oxygen. I felt a warmth start at the top of my head and wash down to my toes, a warmth that felt like it was scrubbing my very DNA clean of that sulfur smell. The angel's voice echoed in the room one last time. The recording is erased, Sarah Miller. The ledger is torn. But look at your son. I looked at Toby. He was sitting on the floor, playing with a wooden spoon. He looked up at me and smiled, a real smile. Not the needle-toothed grin of the monster, but the pure, radiant joy of a child who is finally, for the first time in his life, actually safe. "Jesus is in the house, Mommy," Toby said. He didn't say it like a Sunday school answer. He said it like he was announcing that the sun had come up. "Buddy, I'm warning you because I love you with the love of a woman who almost lost everything. I'm talking to you right now, you, sitting in your truck on a long haul, you, the nurse finishing your shift, you, the dad who thinks his family is fine just the way it is. The baby monitor is playing. The static is rising. You might not hear it with your ears yet, but your soul is vibrating with the frequency of it. The recording of your funeral is being pressed right now. The demons are already practicing the music. They're standing in the corners of your living room, laughing at your plans for next year, because they know how thin the veil is. They know that without Jesus, you are a house with no roof in a hurricane. What are you waiting for? Are you waiting for a charred footprint on your floor? Are you waiting to see a version of yourself in a funeral dress staring back at you from the window? Don't wait for the terror. Seek the mercy while it can still be found. I'm telling you, it's not about being religious. It's about being alive. I was dead for 30 years and I didn't even know I was a corpse. I was walking, talking, and working, but I was a ghost. Today, I am breathing. Today, the name of Jesus isn't a swear word, it's my heartbeat. You need to get on your knees. I don't care where you are. Pull the car over. Lock the bathroom door at work. Go into your backyard. Call out to him. Not with a fancy prayer, but with the raw, desperate cry of someone who realizes they've been sleeping in a burning building. Tell him you're tired of the middle ground. Tell him you're tired of Mr. Smiles whispering in the nursery of your mind. Tell him you want the blood to cover your debt. Ask him to come into your house and throw out every shadow that's been nesting there because of your silence. Folks, the time is so short. I can still feel the vibration of that shovel hitting the dirt in the back of my mind. It's a reminder that every breath is a gift and every second is a choice. Don't let the recording finish. Don't let the lid close on a soul that was meant for the light. I'm Sarah Miller, and I'm telling you, the cross is real, the devil is hungry, and Jesus is the only way out of the woods. Turn to him. Turn to him right now, before the static becomes the only thing you ever hear again. There is a peace that passes all understanding waiting for you, but you have to walk through the door. You have to admit you're lost before you can be found. Don't wait for tomorrow. Tomorrow is the devil's favorite word. Today is the day of salvation. I've told you what I saw. I've given you the warning. The rest is between you and the King. Choose life. Choose him. This story is a reminder that the spiritual world is more real than the one we see. If you felt the weight of this message, do not ignore it. Your life is not a coincidence, and your future is not yet set in stone. Turn to Jesus Christ today. Repent of your sins, ask for his forgiveness, and invite him to be the Lord of your life. He is waiting to turn your funeral into a resurrection.